is AI hurting you, helping you, or will it have any effect on you?
So AI helps us a lot. We build our own AI at DeliverFund. We actually have some incredible engineers who are way smarter than I could ever even hope to be, who build that. AI helps and hurts. The way it helps is it's just a technology, and ultimately, when you distill technology, that word, down to its irreducible minimum, all we're talking about is the ability for computers to do things that humans could do at scale. That's really all it is. And so AI, for our purposes, helps us because things that we used to need 10, 15 humans to do, we can now do with one. So it helps us from that perspective. It hurts because AI can generate imagery. And that AI generated imagery can then saturate the market and desensitize our sons towards the sexualization and commoditization of women. It can desensitize our daughters towards the commercialization and the commoditization of women, and so then they think that that's what being a woman means, is just to be eye candy for a man, and so it really hurts because it erodes the culture. And that's why we need to have some safeguards on AI. As an example, AI can create child pornography. That's a really bad idea. Right. Wired magazine actually tried to make an argument. It was a terrible argument, very illogical, that AI-generated child pornography should be legalized because then that would keep these sickos from actually hurting real children. And the reality is the research shows that just the opposite happens.
Right, but the research shows that any things that people watch, ultimately they want to act out.
Exactly. And so because any muscle you feed gets stronger.
Right.
And so anyway, so it hurts because there are kind of sicko organizations that are trying to make these arguments that AI can be used to actually feed these predators without feeding them the real thing. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just going to increase their appetite for the real thing. We know that. So for our purposes, though, AI is very helpful. We've been playing around with using AI to fight human trafficking for over 5 years now. The problem has always been you really need three things in order for AI to work. You need the expertise. Well, that has been very expensive, but we managed to get that. You needed the data, which we have more data than the entire United States government does. So I mean, we've got the data, but then you needed the hardware, right? AI doesn't just happen magically. It happens in very specific hardware. And that has previously been cost prohibitive. However, what has happened with AI and essentially the Gen AI revolution that has happened over the last 18 months, that has actually reduced the costs of the things that we were trying to do by almost 90%. So what used to be like, wow, I would really like to do that, but that's going to be $5 million. Now I'm like, oh, I'd really like to do that, and I can do it for $427,000. So that's why we are using so much AI, and I use AI in my other companies as well.
You must need like I'm going to date myself, a crazed supercomputer to hold all this data.
So that's exactly it. So it's supercomputers or high performance computers.
I didn't even think they made crazed supercomputers anymore.
Yeah. So Cray actually got bought out by IBM, and then I think they got bought out by Dell. But so the original Cray team from Sandia National Laboratories left Sandia National Laboratories. Yeah, I mean, they've worked there for almost 20 years. They left about 3 years ago and started their own company, and they're one of the companies that builds our supercomputers. So they can build what used to be a multi-million-dollar computer. They now build and sell that for about $100,000. So it's
and I'm sure they're a lot more compact now.
Oh yeah,
before now they were like the size of a Buick. I mean, in your office, I mean, they were huge.
Yeah, well, they're the size of a Buick, sure. but they also had to have special rooms that they ran in. They had to have special electricity. They had to have all this specialized infrastructure. And that was like twice the price of the computer itself.
Right.
Now, yeah, these things, I mean, literally, they're about the size of a Keurig. You can plug them into wall power. They don't need any specialized cooling. And that is the reason why we're now able to do things with AI that 5 years ago when we were scoping those projects, it was cost prohibitive. We couldn't do it. It was way too expensive. And now we're getting ready to launch an AI-based program that is one that we actually scoped 5 years ago. It was going to be over $5 million to build it. And I just said, I can't do that. Like, I mean, you know, it's hard enough keeping the lights on for the work that DeliverFund does. Where am I going to get an extra $5 million? Well, we will start the fundraise for that in August, actually starting that in Houston. And the total cost for it is $427,000. And that's not only to build the program, but to run it for 24 months.
Wow.
Where before that was $5 million just to build it.
Do you find it hard to raise money?
Yes and no. I'm not a nonprofit guy. So I don't, I'm not a nonprofit professional. I run DeliverFund like I run any of my for-profit companies. Right. And I look at especially large donors like venture investors and treat them as such. And I find that there are people who are very philanthropic, who have been very successful, who really like that. And then there are those who say, wait a minute, that's not the way you run a nonprofit, because that's not the way that we've done it for the last 30 years. And so when I find the former, the people who say, oh, wait a minute, you run DeliverFund like you do your for-profit companies, and you've got metrics, and you actually look at ROI only instead of return on investment, it's return on impact. You look at scale, you're constantly pivoting, you're doing all the same things that all of our companies do. Yeah, you're our guy. We'll invest in DeliverFund. So when I find those, I usually find that the fundraising cycle is very, very quick. It's just a matter of finding those. That's always the issue.
One of the other things I just want to kind of touch on, just because I feel like, sending the message out or having this conversation, like you and I have a mutual friend that has been very active and involved in a program here locally that does a lot for the trafficking rings, or to try and stop them. But I feel like, because you said it when you were talking about getting this started, you thought somebody was handling this. You thought somebody was already heading this up. You thought somebody was, taking care of it. But I think the progression of the internet happened at such a pace. Like when we go back, we can all remember the Duger case. Casey?
Yes.
Right? When she was stolen out of her home and kept as a sex slave for years and years and years.
Duger, you mean Elizabeth Smart?
There was a couple.
But, Elizabeth Smart
we heard about all of those, over the last 20 years. And everybody remembers hearing about it because it was so shocking, right? But as the trafficking thing increases in speed, we're all talking, like you said, about AA. We all know somebody who's been a recovering alcoholic or been a recovering drug addict. They've been to rehab for this, that, or the other thing. They're not, they can sit around Thanksgiving and say, oh, no, I'm not going to have that glass of wine. You don't have people coming to Christmas dinner and say, oh, yeah, I like to sleep with children. It still has such a shock value to it that people don't want to be in the know, or it's not happening here. It's so easy to turn a blind eye to it because it's not in their face enough.
Yes, but I also think that there's an issue here in that, like, let's take the traditional way that we fought human trafficking, which is we're going to have these restoration homes for the victims. Well, that's never ending. Right. So there's an old missionary parable of a missionary going to Africa. You've probably heard this before. And the missionary is pulling children out of the river. And one of the tribal chief walks up and says, what are you doing? He says, I'm pulling these children out of the river so I can save them. And the tribal chief says, well, have you walked upriver to see who's throwing them in? And that's the traditional way that we have fought human trafficking, is we're just pulling the victims out of the river, instead of actually going up and saying, wait a minute, who's throwing these victims in the river? And how do we make their life incredibly complicated so that instead of being able to throw 3 victims in, they can only throw 1, and then make it so they can throw none, right? And so we often, in the NGO community, is extremely guilty of this. They let perfect get in the way of progress, but for-profit businesses don't do that. And DeliverFund probably wouldn't have been as successful as it was had I not been building for-profit, venture-backed tech companies at the same time. And so I think that we just need to step back and say, wait a minute, what can we actually do to move the needle on this issue? Because also within NGOs, there tends to be this concept of like, well, if we can help one person, and like that's somehow noble, like, oh, well, if we can only help one person, then it's all worth it. No, it's not. Because if you can help 100,000 people for the same amount of effort that it took to help that one, well, that's called being smart. So let's go do it the smart way, right? Let's be as wise as possible and start attacking this as an entire industry instead of the traditional way, which is the, beat up puppies with Sarah McLachlan playing on your TV that just makes you want to cry, right?
Right. There's Sally Struthers, I call it. The Sally Struthers moment.
Yeah. And so while that, we don't do that kind of marketing at DeliverFund. We don't do a lot of marketing in general. We do a lot of advocacy and a lot of educating people on the issue, but we don't do a lot of that because it's manipulative. So I don't want people coming to us being like, oh, I'm going to give you this check because I'm just so sad about what's happening. I want people to say, you know what? We're going to give you this check, DeliverFund, because we think that you actually have a plan to move the needle. And so it's actually going to help solve this problem as opposed to just continually working it. There's a guy who's a big donor of ours who lives in Austin, a hedge fund guy worth, bazillions of dollars. Also one of the smartest people I've ever met. I have coffee with him every once in a while when I go to Austin. And I tell you, at the end of a cup of coffee, I need a nap because my brain is so tired from listening to him, because he's like a Elon Musk, but with better people skills. And he was telling me once how much he hated nonprofits. And I mean, he's donated a couple $100,000 to DeliverFund over the last couple of years. And I said, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, you are telling me all this stuff about how you hate nonprofits, and yet you're donating significantly to DeliverFund. What's the disconnect there? And he said, oh, well, it's simple. He's like, one, you don't run your nonprofit like a nonprofit, right? I mean, we get third-party certified audits every single year, as an example, right? So we know exactly where money's going, and we tighten things up and we get better financially. He said, and two, he said, Nick, I think you're playing to win, and I want to be a part of that. And we have to ask ourselves, with a lot of nonprofits, are they actually playing to win? Do they really want the problem to go away? Or do they actually want the problem to continue to get worse so they can
exacerbate the problem, so they always have job security?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The best thing that could possibly happen to DeliverFund is that DeliverFund closed its doors because it just wasn't needed anymore. Instead, while we've sat here, we've had multiple law enforcement agencies reach out and say, hey, I've got a case. Can you help me with it? And we just can't help them all at once. And so oftentimes it's just a matter of pushing them towards different training that we have. Say, oh, you actually don't need to talk to us directly. We have a computer-based training module for that. Here's a link to it. Oh, you actually just need to search a specific phone number. We created an app so that you can do that. Here's a link to it. Oh, you just need access to some software. Hold on. Let us broker a conversation with you and another company. And then every once in a while, it's, wow, you really do have a complicated case here. This is over 300 massage parlors that spread across the entire country that all seem to be owned by a Chinese company in New York. Yeah, we're gonna give you some analyst manpower to start digging into that.
Okay, let me ask you one more pressing question in the back of my mind for maybe a mom who's listening to this and she believes her child or has been trafficked and she's missing. I know you're working with law enforcement, you're providing them tools, but for the people who are still clinging to hope that their child is alive or that there's a possible prayer for them, do they have an avenue to reach out to you to say, can you help me? Or what would you recommend for those people?
So unfortunately, not us. And the reason why is because we're serving over 500 law enforcement agencies, and we can't be everything to everybody. If it's a child, it's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're an incredible organization. We're huge fans. We work with them very closely, and that's really the point that they should be working there. Also, hiring private investigators, if they can afford it, is always a good idea. Of course, you gotta vet that private investigator very carefully,
Right.
And then also working with law enforcement and essentially being their own advocate. That's what they have to do. We don't take cases from the general public because the customer that we serve is the law enforcement officer. Now, we've had plenty of law enforcement officers who are working those missing children cases where they believe there is a trafficking nexus. Then the law enforcement officer reaches out to us. And there's a legal reason for that. Because if we do, well, for two reasons. One, you guys are in Texas. I know a lot of men in Texas, and God forbid I gave them the location of their daughter. They're going to go rescue their daughter and then probably go to prison for murder. So we have to be very careful of who we give that information to. But then also when we work with law enforcement, it ensures that everything is done properly so that the trafficker or the perpetrator, right, the predator in this case, will actually see justice and go to prison and won't just be released back on the street where they're going to hurt somebody else's child.
What about the Johns, like the famous list, like the Epstein list, if there really is one, and why don't
Sure.
those get released?
So I got some conspiracy theories around Epstein. I don't believe there's an actual list.
I've often thought that there wasn't either.
So like he was smart enough to work with some intelligence agency. I have a hard time believing that he pulled this off on his own. I think that he was orchestrated, he was created, and I think he was created by an intelligence agency. It wouldn't be ours because obviously our intelligence agencies would have nothing to gain. I don't know who. Could be the Israelis, could be the Russians, could be the French, right? Could be the Chinese. I don't really know. But somebody who hates America. He was. I think it was a intelligence operation. I have no proof of that. Second, I don't believe there wouldn't be a list, because if there was an intelligence operation, or even if it wasn't, right, the guy wouldn't be stupid enough to keep a list. So all the people were like, "Oh, release the list." What list? There's flight logs. We have copies of those logs. Now, do I believe that every single person who traveled to his island one time, or had a meeting with him one time, or even two times before they maybe saw he wasn't really a financier, didn't know what he was doing? Do I believe every single person who came into contact with Epstein is some kind of sicko? Absolutely not. However, there are some people who went to his island over 30 times.
Right.
Well, that really, that begs a lot of questions.
Right.
And so I think that when it comes to the customer side, right, that's what we were talking about before with, adding friction and risk into the human trafficking market. I think we should attack customers everywhere we can find them, but as a secondary effort. The primary effort should be against the traffickers themselves, because the traffickers are a limited quantity, and the customers are almost, it's men across the globe. It's almost unlimited. So how can you fight something that's unlimited? Well, you go to the thing that connects the customer to what it is they want, which is essentially the wholesaler. In this case, that is the human trafficker. So, think about all the sick people that exist in the world, but can't get access to the thing that they want. They're still sick, but if they can't get access to it, then we've essentially solved the problem. And that there's lots of, especially with churches and whatnot, there's lots of we just need to reach the men. I'm like, well, good luck with that. it's a fallen world, and hearts of men are fallen and sinful, and so this is just going to continue for forever. And there are so many people who have convinced themselves, right? There's this whole movement within the male community right now, which I completely eschew, called the red pill movement, which is this like guy Andrew Tate and all these people who are basically just creating this set of circumstances, believing that women are somehow
Objects to be
objects and less than. And so and they have all types of pretty flowery language on how they talk about it, most of them from their mom's basements. And so when you look at the customer base that fuels this market, you're not going to change the hearts of men in any dramatic way. And in my opinion, as a Christian, that is the place of the church.
Right.
So our place is to go after the thing that makes the system work, which
Right.
is the human trafficking market.
Is there anything that you want to touch on and you want to tell listeners that we didn't ask the right question about, or any highlight facts that just drive it home for anybody listening? That
Yeah, so anytime I get an opportunity to talk to dads, I'm going to take it. And sometimes the only way to talk to dads is through moms. When you look at most of the problems that plague society, many of them can be traced back to either fatherless homes or dads that are checked out. And when you talk to human trafficking victims, which we've talked to dozens upon dozens, you often find that the very first thing that started them down a bad path is a bad relationship with their dad. And so the number one tool for preventing human trafficking is fathers. And fathers not being perfect, because none of us are, but doing our absolute best job to be the best fathers we can be. And that means two things. One, not being part of this problem. So if you're a father and you're watching, the Cowboys play in Texas, and then the Cowboys cheerleaders come on and you're making all kinds of, lewd comments about them in front of your 12-year-old son, well, what do you think your 12-year-old son is going to grow up to be?
Right.
And that's on you. So I think that it's very important, because human trafficking and the commercial sex industry writ large and pornography is an industry that is driven by men, and it's driven by men who are exploiting women. And I will often hear from men who are just like, oh, men will be men. Well, yes. And we should fight against the worst sides of ourselves every single day. And I don't say that as a guy who played football in high school. No, I went to war 30 times, became a special operator, became a shooter in one of the most specialized units in the US government. I have a little bit of a credibility to stand on here as a man who actually did the most dangerous things that we have for any man to do, and still do. I still ride motorcycles through the mountains and hunt and, climb up mountains. And, my wife says I'm constantly trying to kill myself. I'm still out there doing those things. But we as men need to use our strength and intellect to protect, not to exploit.
Right.
And if you are a man and you are logging into pornography, you are exploiting somebody who's weaker than you. That is 100% what you are doing.
1,000% fact.
Even if you're not putting in even if you're not putting in the search bar what we're talking about here today, you're still exploiting another human being that might not
100%.
be making the decision to be on that platform.
One of the things that COVID brought was human traffickers realizing that they could make a lot of money off OnlyFans. And they could do that by forcing victims to participate in pornography, that they could force their victims to go dance at strip clubs. And it was a lower risk way for them to get a lot of money, because it was all happening under the guise of it's all legal. So if you're a man going to a strip club, you're probably not going to donate to DeliverFund. I don't really care, but you should be highly confronted by what we do, because you are the problem. If you're a man and you're logging into pornography, you are the problem. If you're exploiting some woman by purchasing sexual services from her, whether she's a human trafficking victim or not, you are the problem. And so the best thing that men can do is be good men, be good fathers, do their damnedest to do that, do their absolute best to be good husbands, be good members of society, but then also hold other men accountable. So when you have other men who are like, oh, hey, check her out. It's like, hey man, like, that's not really cool. Like, not around me.
I was told one of the
training their sons.
Yeah.
So training their sons to respect women.
Absolutely. One of the number one things that was used in trafficking was the app TikTok.
So they're all Instagram,
Okay.
TikTok, Snapchat, a bunch of others. They're all
One and the
kind
same.
of equally complicit. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a technology that we're working on. If you know any young, preteen or teenage girls who have access to social media, conduct this experiment. Go ask them. Say, hey, have you ever been inappropriately solicited or contacted by an older man through any of your social media? It's so prevalent in our society today that you will have a hard time finding a young girl who hasn't had that happen. That's a problem. And so one of the technologies that we're working on is to shine a big spotlight on that and make it so that those girls, those young girls, can actually report that in a way that those men's wives can find it, their employers can find it, their community can find it. Because I think when it comes to the commercial sex industry and human trafficking writ large, one of the biggest problems is the anonymity. It's the fact that people can do dirty deeds behind closed doors and they know no one will ever find out. So
or the fact that they do dirty deeds and they don't care. In other words, I will, like the owner of the football, the Patriots. Remember, he went to the massage parlor, and
Right.
but pulling his Bentley right up in the front, and in other words,
Untouchable.
I'm untouchable.
But is it that they're really untouchable, or is it that society has just taken this like, oh well, boys will be
Exactly,
boys, man,
exactly.
Right. No.
right?
I
No,
love
I
that
think
you
you're right.
I love that you took that moment to talk to, because I have felt that way for years. And, so many talking with women, and that is such and even women in the church, it's just, and no, it's not just, because the second you say that, then it's your daughter. And then is it just?
Exactly. And so one of the cases that we were involved in at DeliverFund was a young boy who was trafficked, and he was contacted over a gaming console, like an Xbox or a PlayStation, something like that, because those are connected to the internet and they have chat features. And so you can find it on our YouTube channel. It's the story of Noah, is what we call him. And so Noah, was groomed by a predator, and he was then abducted and taken. And our analysts got involved with law enforcement, were able to find him really within a few hours, and he was rescued. But by the time that they found him, he was already 2 states away. And that's how quick it all happened. When I started talking to people about this case involving a young boy, I noticed something very different. Because at this point, I'd been talking to people about the human trafficking issue for about 3 years, but the situation always predominantly centers around women and girls. And when I talk about women and girls getting trafficked, people are very sad. When I talk about boys getting trafficked, people get angry. To include the women, get angry about boys being trafficked and sad about women and girls getting trafficked. And I thought, why the difference? And the only thing I could come up with, and I don't have data to back this up, so this is just my opinion, but the only thing I could come up with is that when it came to women and girls, it was expected. It wasn't surprising. But when it came to boys, it wasn't expected and it was surprising. And so the reaction was anger instead of sadness, right? Anger, as in anger is not a level of acceptance. Sadness is a level of acceptance. And that was this epiphany for me to say, wait a minute, we have this issue within society that's driving all of this, which is not the objectification of women. And this is probably going to get me in trouble, but I would actually make an argument that women sometimes want to be objectified. It's why they wear makeup and wear the clothes that they wear and whatnot, right? It's like they want to get healthy attention. It's commoditization. It's the putting a price on, right? Because you can have an object that is priceless, or you can have an object that has a price on it, and we call that a commodity. And so it's the commoditization of women and girls that is the problem. And that is a problem that is being driven by men. However, those men are also, for lack of a better term, brainwashing, because while you have that man sitting there making the lewd comments about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders to his 12-year-old son, sitting there also is his 14-year-old daughter. And so she goes, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be for the men in my life. So to kind of answer your question is a very long way of doing it. Men need to be better men. And they need to be stronger, faster, and smarter for the protection of those who are not for the exploitation of those who are not. And this is a hill I will die on. I have had entirely too many young men and even older men who, quite frankly, have not been very successful, haven't really done anything very impressive, and yet will sit there and be lewd and commoditize the women around them. And that right there is the biggest problem. And if we can stop that so that men, fathers train their sons to be gentlemen, right? To be warrior gentlemen, but to be gentlemen, so that men train their daughters on how to be properly respected and how to be properly talked to. And I know that sounds very 1950s.
No, you have to teach people how to treat you.
Yes, that's a much, much better society. And so why do we have the predators within the fraternity community on college campuses? Because they can get away with it. And right. Where did they learn that? They learned that from either their dad or somebody else's dad. And so that's the cycle. And that's part of the reason why, I mean, when you look at human trafficking, I've had so many people say, Nick, why are you taking on this issue? Well, this isn't a man's issue. It's actually an issue that primarily affects women and girls. So why are you doing
global?
It? Well, because it's an issue that primarily affects women and girls that is created by men. And so if we don't have men stand up, we don't have men say, hey, this is unacceptable. We don't have men who will say, I am going to change my behavior. I'm going to support this cause instead of, the other things, my online gambling habit or whatever. Then if I don't stand up and say that, and I'm by no means the only one, right? There's plenty of other people significantly more successful than I could ever even hope to be, who are saying the same things. If we don't all stand up and say, no, that is inappropriate behavior and we won't stand for it, we are going to make this world a much, much better place. And that is one of the things that I think the military special ops community, after coming out of the wars, has actually done a pretty good job of. I know so many of the big name, veteran influencers and what I call the soft bros, and they're all standing behind what it is that I'm doing. And all of them are preaching this message of our strength from our masculinity. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's masculinity, and that is either used for good or bad. The strength of our masculinity should be used to protect, not to exploit.
You have just summarized and said what I've wanted every man I've ever met in my life to say, because I have paid witness to that very thing for so many years of, yes, it's always encouraged. And we've arrived at this place in society where we choose to be woke and we say, oh, that you can't say that anymore. You can't say that anymore. And you're the first person I've heard to say, you can't say that about women anymore. Like, don't do that. That's not cool, not in my presence, and I won't tolerate it.
Well, there's a lot to it. Pornography is a great example. The research on pornography is clear. It's not up for debate. It makes you stupid and weak. So if you're a man and you are addicted to pornography, you are just becoming more and more dumb, and you're becoming weaker. And that means that you are just not even competition for men like me.
No, and
So,
you
you're
possibly
taking yourself out of the game.
can't think clearly in other aspects of your life. You can't.
Yeah.
If you're watching that, you can't be a good husband. You can't be a good father. You can't be a good businessman.
Yeah, research is very clear on that. And so you might be successful in one part of your life, but the rest of it is in complete shambles. And I don't care if you've been successful in business, you have a lot of money, if your family life is in shambles,
Right.
or your family life is great, but your business life is in shambles. Like being a man is hard. And guess what? Who cares? Suck it up. It always has been. And if you aren't using your strength to protect, then you're probably using your strength or your position to exploit. And I think that so much of what we deal with in society kind of comes down to that core root issue. And so if we would just have men being better men, we would do away with the majority of these problems. But society also has to decide that it wants men to be better men. If you look through social media, I actually represent the antithesis of what most of the quote unquote, there was that meme that going around about, would you rather be stuck in the woods with a man or a bear? And women are like, oh, we want to choose the bear. It's like, okay, but are you going to fight that bear? Are you right? Like, who's going to protect you from that bear? Because it's not going to be you. And we see the same thing in the military, with the militaries trying so hard. SOCOM is trying so hard to get women through these selection processes for special ops. We never set back to say, hey, wait a minute, is this even a conversation we should be having? There are very important roles in our society that are thousands and tens of thousands and millions of years old, right? I mean, it's been there since the beginning of time. Instead of embracing those roles, right? Equal but different. Instead of embracing those, we're basically trying to dumb down one and prop up another, and it's just not going to work. And it's just going to lead to more people preying on other people. And I've watched multiple companies multiple countries collapse. When I have people complaining about the United States of America, I want to say, go hang out in southern Afghanistan for a little while. Let me know how that works out for you. You'll be, if you're a woman, you'll be enslaved within hours. If you're a man, you'll either assimilate or you'll be killed. I mean, the choices become very binary in those parts of the world that people here in America have never traveled to and have no experience with. And so they glamorize it and they say, well, maybe Osama bin Laden had some good points, and because they have no idea what they're actually talking about. And if we, and I mean all of us as a society, if men don't step up and hold other men accountable, if women don't step up and hold men accountable, as they've been doing literally since the Book of Judges, then how can we expect our society to actually get back on track?
It starts with our politicians too.
Yeah, the people who are always going to bear the consequences are going to be children, because they're the most vulnerable. And I'm glad you brought up politicians, and I'm going to get on a soapbox here real quick, because do you know?
Hold on, let me move over and make room for you on the soapbox.
Do you know many politicians in the state of Texas?
Unfortunately, I know politicians everywhere, but yeah.
Okay, great. So this won't win you any friends, but conduct this little experiment.
I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to get shit done.
Yeah, and it's important for everybody to understand that politicians are tools, and they, in
every sense of the word.
Yes, and they're there to do a job, and if they don't do their job, you do what you would do with any other tool. You throw it away and you get a new one. And if it's a trusty hammer that's just really working out well, then you keep it. But if the handle breaks, you throw it out and you get a new one. And politicians are no different. So the next time you're at a political fundraising event, or you have a politician, you've got them in front of all their peers, and you say, "Excuse me, Mr. or Mrs. Politician. What can you tell me about the human trafficking issue? And is this an important issue for you? And you're going to hear all kinds of wringing of hands and mashing of teeth. And they're going to say, it's the most important thing. And I'm going to do all of this stuff to fight human trafficking. And you go, okay, that's awesome. Thank you for that. What have you done over the years to fight human trafficking? Because you've been in office over 20 years. What have you done? And they'll come up with some flowery politician language. And then they'll tell you how important it is. And you're walking them into a trap. Because the next thing, the third question I want you to ask them is, that's amazing that you take this issue so seriously, Mr. and Mrs. Politician. Please show me the budget line item in the city budget, in the federal budget, in the state budget, in the wherever, where you are funding our counter human trafficking capability within insert city's police force. And suddenly you're going to get a very ugly look, and they're going to be like, well, you don't quite understand, and blah, blah, blah. Well, do we have a gangs unit in our police? Oh, yes, it's very good. Awesome. And it's fully funded? Yes. Okay. Do we have a property crimes unit? Oh, yeah. It's very good. It's fully funded. That's why copper's not getting pulled out of your buildings anymore. Oh, okay. Awesome. Do we have a narcotics unit? Oh yeah, it's fully funded and yada, yada. Okay. So what you're saying is that it's more important to fund the protection of commercial properties, which are insured, from getting the copper pulled out of the building than it is to protect children from being trafficked. Because we know where your money is, your heart will be also. Need to be held accountable to start actually funding ability within their law enforcement and prosecutorial. Not doing that, then you have a problem. So no doubt who don't really understand what's going on in the state of Texas when it comes to that, or have them contact me. I will happily walk them through exactly what's going on bill to increase penalties for human trafficking, increase budgets and all that. They can put those things in bills.
So well, with that being said, I hate to cut you off. I know you two could talk forever, but tell the listeners where they can find you, where they can donate, and get in touch.
So the best, you can find us at DeliverFund.org. That's DELIVER fund, FUND.org. You can donate, take training, download our app, all that right through our website. See what we're all about. You can find me at Nic, Nic McKinley, McKinley.com, and I'm at the.nic.mckinley on all the social media platforms. And DeliverFund is just that, at DeliverFund.
Well, you are a hero among us. Thank you so much. I can't wait to get on and see when's the next training. I got to be there. And
that'd be awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye. He's awesome.
He's amazing.
Amazing.